Rock is a kind of music that aims to differentiate itself from other genres of popular music based on ideological position as well as on its production and consumption practices. Among the varied social causes that triggered the development of rock in Mexico, we may include economic crisis, feminist, student and indigenous movements, multipartyism, and the technological revolution. Mexican rock came to Mexico as a genre imported from the United States. To understand better the role of the rock in Mexican society, we can analyze its evolution from its arrival in the 50s to modern times. At its beginning, the years following up to 1910 Mexican Revolution highly promoted the bolero and ranchera music. Society was striving for a sense of nationalism, and there were different segments that support these genres as the image of what Mexican music was and represented. Other segments thought it should be more tribal music, making reference to the indigenous roots of the Mexican people, and others promoted the vision of a different country dragged by modern eras. They were the ones that received rock music from the United States. This genre was seen as a threat to the government. They thought that the very popular pre-established genres were the characteristic of progress of the country in the post-revolution era. The golden age of cinema was also a strong factor that influenced ranchera and bolero styles. Popular figures like Pedro Infante promoted these genres, but rock music was, in first place, a foreign genre. Secondly, throughout the coming of the 60s, rock music had a strong influence in the promoting of freedom, equality, and civil rights ideologies. Soon, the young generation of the country slowly began to incline to the British invasion and rock music. However, the state achieved to keep the movement underground for a decade, and it still didn't represent an iconic style of Mexican music. It was in the final years of the 60s, with Ordaz's government, that the oppression was so big that a lot of people in Mexico joined to the global environment of rock music. Adding the events of the slaughter of Tlatelolco in the 68 and the global attention Mexico brought since it hosted the Olympic Games, rock gained power. Even so, the final breaking point was 10 years later when Echeverria's government once more failed to contain the social movements and protests from a really tired and pissed-off generation of youngsters that were shut up from decades. Thus began the 80s decade as the rebirth of rock in Mexico and an icon to the country's national repertoire. Now setting the social background of the 80s, let's recall that this decade was known as the Lost Decade, due to the great struggle that the country lived economically, politically, and socially. After Echeverria's government, a constant devaluation of the peso took place along the decade. Mexico began to lose a lot of the economical power it had created till the 70s. Plus, in the 85, during the La Madrid period, Mexico witnessed its strongest natural catastrophe, as an earthquake tore down a lot of neighborhoods and sectors of the city. All these elements sum up to create an ever-increasing crisis that would continue to devalue the country's economic power, dividing the social sectors and creating a major gap between the social classes. This led to the social movement known as Los Chavos Banda. These were people from the lowest sectors of society and represented the origins of the modern rock. These were the first bands started to translate songs by foreign rock bands. A new trend was to sing in English, which was not at all allusive to the Mexican culture, and neither depicted any social or political messages. Times of repression to the youth by the Mexican government, social movements of the 60s as a trigger for the development of a kind of rock which depicted political protest and a general repulsion to authoritarianism, paternalism, and corruption.
Rock and roll arrived to Mexico in the mid-50s via Bill Haley and Elvis Presley. Favored by the modernizing spirit of the period, this new tendency was received by middle and high class as a cosmopolitanism theater, contrasting the folklore popular tastes. So it became a sign of economic and social status. Rebel Without a Cause and Blackbird Jungle are movies that associated concepts of rock, youth, and rebellion. It began to be thought that young people threatened Mexican social structure by opening the door to the expression of sexual desires and the dissatisfaction of youth with the adult world. Rock was incorporated by accepted and public artists, for example, the movie Los Chiflados del Rock. New artists emerged, such as Los Locos del Ritmo, Los Teen Tops, Rebeldes del Rock, Black Jeans, Enrique Guzmán, Cesar Costa, among others. Mexican society was affected by both national and international situations. For example, Tlatelolco Massacre, class inequality, Vietnam, and Cold Wars. Groups like the Rolling Stones, The Doors, and Bob Dylan were listened. Their music was influenced by the pessimism of existentialism and the Vietnam War. In Mexico, the movement of this stage was known as Onda Chicana. It wanted to produce music that fused local and international artists in order to express young people's experiences and their opinion in social and political issues. Javier Batis, Three Souls in My Mind, Peace and Love, and Carlos Santana are the most outstanding artists from this stage. As a consequence of social and classist stigmatization, middle classes abandoned their Mexican rock affiliation. Hence it became musical culture for the marginal youth, and the culture industry was not interested in producing it. In this period, it can be seen a displacement of rock in its social status, symbolic value, and economic development, which determine its way of underground production and consumption. Artists from this stage are Three Souls in My Mind, Paco Grueso, Nahuatl, Los Dug Dogs, Javier Batis, Enigma, and Naftalina. In 1980, the Museo Universitario del Chopo organized the first original rock competition contest. After that, more spaces for rock were opened, just as the censorship was decreasing, and by the end of the decade, people talk about the boom. This stage is characterized by the rock marginalization, the acceptance by the middle and upper classes, and its return to the cultural media. This generation decided to compose in its language, Spanish. They talk about personal problems, urban stories, and social criticism. Jaime Lopez, Cecilia Toussaint, Guillermo Briceño, Nina Galindo, and Botellita de Jerez are some musicians from this stage. On the other hand, the boom of Spanish rock started with the release of the rock en tu idioma discs. These featured artists such as Los Hombres G, Mexicano, Soda Stereo, y Los Enanitos Verdes. Despite the boom of the rock in Spanish last a few years, it is the interchange between music from different countries and helped the creation of rock in Spanish as an independent genre. The boom helped the incorporation of Mexican rock to the culture industry, as well as getting more followers.
After Avandero, Mexican rock was confined to the underground. It became banned from the national radio stations. However, the Ollas Funkies and Cafés Cantantes were places of expression for the marginalized Mexican youth. The gatherings of rock bands in such places shaped a genre which involved lyrics about the social conditions of the lower class juveniles and built a unique connection between musicians and the public, for they shared a common identity. They belonged to the same side. Along the development of Mexican rock, the appearance of the literatura de la onda, which sought to transform literature through language, journals, and newspapers like Piedra Rodante, accompanied a social phenomenon that was born from below. They as well faced serious complications orchestrated by the government. During the boom of Mexican rock, it was often compared to the most well-known of rock en español, but it wasn't a copy of Argentinian nor Spanish rock. Mexican rock was a result of the very complex social and political events in our country. At that time, rock music wasn't tolerated. For instance, in 1980 a concert of Johnny Winter in Temixco, Morelos, was cancelled at the very last minute despite the organizers fulfilled all necessary requirements asked by the authorities. The people that arrived to the concert was severely and violently repressed. Even some women were raped by policemen. Some bands chose to create songs with humor, mocking stereotypes about rock culture. While they opted for new crossbred sound, they were paving their own path, away from Anglo-Saxon rock. One of the representative bands of this movement was Botellita de Jerez.
Now I will talk about the musical genre analysis. Let's not forget that even when it had its own promotion, story, and development here in Mexico, rock music still shares the same structure that American rock bands used. There are three main forms in the rock genre, and these forms are so popular that even nowadays they are used to produce pop music. The first form is known as strophic form. This form states that a song contains multiple models, all of which have the same basic underlying music. Though the instrumentation and the lyrics change, the beginning of the song contains the same, or at least very similar, melody, harmony, and phrase structure as the sections that follow. Listening a bit more closely, we can hear a similar but abbreviated version of the same patterns of the opening of the songs. Even the instrumental sections in the middle of strophes have the same underlying pattern, just a different melody, usually in the form of a solo. The entire song is a repetition of the same basic pattern, or slight variations of it. Songs that follow this structure are sometimes abbreviated AAA because the same basic material A is repeated throughout the song. And the basic unit that is repeated is called a strophe. Strophic form was more common in early rock and roll years in the 1950s and 1960s, and lost power in the 1970s and beyond. Another formal structure that is more common in early rock and roll is AABA form, also called a 32-bar song form. After a brief introduction, the songs in these forms begin with two strophes. However, where normally an instrumental strophe followed in the AAA form, the AABA changes and moves into a bridge. This new section builds tension by contrasting and withholding the main strophe theme before it returns. The song begins and ends with the strophe, and this strophe contains the title lyrics, so it is at the same time the more memorable part of the songs generally. Thus, the strophe is still a primary model, but it has now a secondary model to add interest and tension, that is the bridge, and an auxiliary model that's known as an intro or introduction that helps the song to get off the ground and to have a beginning. The last of the three main form types is known as the best chorus form. The verse chorus form is a versatile song form that rapidly took over rock and roll and has dominated the genre ever since. Like AABA form, it has multiple core non-auxiliary models. However, in AABA, let's remember that the title lyrics, the most memorable music, and the main narrative all tend to take place in the strophes. However, in the verse chorus, those features are split between the verse, that is known as the secondary model, which contains the main narrative text and which begins the song, and a chorus, that is the primary model, which contains the title lyrics, the most memorable melody, and usually ends the song.